Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my 2021 Doctor Who Series 10 ranking, or re-ranking, or revisitation ranking, whatever I put in the title. So this is basically an updated Series 10 ranking to follow up from the revisitation reviews of Doctor Who Series 10's episodes. I originally did do this ranking back in 2018, and it was actually two parts, and then I re-edited it into one part in 2019, just before I did the initial Series 11 one. At that time I was starting up the classic reviews as well, so they were all single part rankings, so I just edited the Series 10 one into one full ranking. So yeah, you can check out that original ranking now, but this is a new ranking to reflect on my thoughts of the Series 10 episodes and Series 10 as a whole, following the revisitation reviews as part of the Doctor Who marathon I have been doing since the end of 2018. Also, or at least for part of the video, if not all of it, I am downstairs, so I've got the list on my computer, as well as I've also put up a list of what my original Series 10 as well as 11 and 12 reviews were, and so we can compare as well as also my usual written ones in case I do need to move back upstairs. So let's not waste any more time with ranking Doctor Who Series 10, which includes the return of Dr. Mysterio, the pilot, Smile, Thin Ice, Knock Knock, Oxygen, Extremis, the Pyramid at the End of the World, the Live the Lad, Empress of Mars, the Eaters of Light, World Nothing Time, and the Doctor Falls, and Twice Upon a Time. So, we've got 14 episodes over 13 spots due to the fact that World Nothing Time and the Doctor Falls is a two-parter, and we've got two Christmas specials this series as well. So let's get started with number 13. Okay, so number 13 is easily the most disappointing Peter Capaldi story after Hellbent. Where is it the worst? Might be after Hellbent. There's some competition, but yeah, one other good thing about being on the computer is I can scroll through my list and check things easier than having to check it later. But sorry if there's any mouse scrolls. But yeah, I think this is a contender for second worst Capaldi story. Second or third worst, definitely, but it's not the worst. And it's definitely the worst of this series. And that is, unfortunately, and I have it on its own individual Blu-ray, Twice Upon a Time. Yeah, if you saw my review / rant yesterday, at the time of the video going out, this is actually being recorded about 5 days later, but at time of recording, it's actually being uploaded. And in fact, I think it is finished uploading. But at time of this going out, it should have been out yesterday. So if you saw my review yesterday, then you would know this is such a bad episode. I'll go for the positives first. Firstly, Peter Capaldi is amazing. It's his final performance, and he is just fantastic as per usual. Also, Pearl Mackie and Mark Gatiss, whilst the characters didn't necessarily need to be there, or maybe the captain, but they're still really good. The Christmas armistice scene is amazing, and it's really nicely directed and cinematographied, and some really lovely visuals, and one last great soundtrack from Murray Gold. Negatives. However, the negatives outweigh the positives. Firstly, this is a very dull story. There really isn't much going. Before we get to the armistice stuff, there really isn't much to it. It's just these glass people want to take people out of time, get their testimonies before they are testimonies from people who haven't given them. So then they get their testimonies to live again in the future, and their memories could live as glass people, and then the actual people go back to their point in time, to their death, without changing any time. That's fine. That's fine for them to do, but there really isn't really much of a story around it. And when they try to do the red herring about these guys maybe being villains, it doesn't work, because when we do find out what they're doing, it's not an evil plan. So the story is kind of pointless, and what's even more pointless is the glass people just not basically flat out saying what they're doing and just making themselves look bad. And even if they had, there still isn't much of a story here. I don't know, maybe the Doctor and the Captain could have teamed up to help them, or the two Doctors together, but it's a nothing story. Unfortunately, for the one last 12th Doctor story, this just nothing. It's not even a fun romp. It's just, oh, there may be some parts, but overall it's not very interesting, and it's not really that pointful. But the worst thing about this story, and what lets it down so much, is the First Doctor's characterization and portrayal. Now, granted, David Bradley is not William Hartnell. He can't capture the First Doctor perfectly, but either he tries too hard or he doesn't try very hard, because he is a very different interpretation of the First Doctor. He doesn't really... I mean, I'm not expecting him to hit all the nails on point, but I'm expecting him to at least try to take inspiration from what William Hartnell did, or Richard Herndale in The Five Doctors. And I think Herndale may have taken inspiration from Hartnell, but with his own spin on it. David Bradley is just playing something a little bit too differently to what Hartnell's like, and this may be also down to director Rachel Talalay as well, possibly. Certainly the script doesn't help, but I'll get more into the scriptal reasons in a moment. But I just don't think David Bradley captures the First Doctor. He's great as William Hartnell, the man, the actor in An Adventure in Space and Time, but he doesn't really capture the First Doctor without playing Hartnell playing the First Doctor. It's just it's not very great, and his voice doesn't quite match, so that begs the question why Big Finish hired it. But then again, maybe Big Finish are able to do something with him that this story wasn't able to. Certainly, they wouldn't get his characterization wrong, as the worst part of this story is Stephen Moffat he doesn't know how to write the First Doctor, or at least he decides to write the First Doctor as a rampant sexist who barely does anything apart from belittle about women or make these rude comments like the TARDIS one I forgot to mention in the review. Like, it's a restaurant for the French, which is questionable, especially considering the First Doctor's favourite point in history was the French Revolution, or at least it was around the time of the end of Season 1, see The Reign of Terror, and it got released on DVD a few months before the 10th Planet. But yeah, so there's some questionable things the First Doctor says. Maybe the stuff about the 12th Doctor being the nurse was for the Captain, as Josh Snares theorises. It's for the Captain's benefit, but everything else just doesn't line up with him. It's just Moffat doesn't know how to write the First Doctor, and the rampant sexism is just unbearable. And it's a complete insult to both the First Doctor's character and William Hartnell. I mean, maybe Hartnell was a sexist in real life, but the First Doctor, the character, was not, except in this shit. And thanks to that, newer viewers, especially younger ones, especially those who don't like sexism, and certainly the more younger female viewers, will probably not, or even some of the older female viewers who haven't seen the classic series, will probably not want to go back and see the First Doctor based on this episode. You've just done the complete opposite of what's supposed to happen. These new stories are supposed to make people love the show, they'll check the stories out, they'll love the characters, check them out, and then they'll go back and watch older ones, start with the new series maybe for the newer viewers, and then maybe they'll jump into the classic stories. But this story is going to make them avoid the Hartnell series, the Hartnell stories, in droves, unless some other fans say, actually, Twice Upon a Time misinterpretates the First Doctor. Try this or that story. One good story I would recommend to fans who maybe aren't so keen on checking out the First Doctor's era, I would recommend The War Machines, because that is towards the end of his era. He's quite fun in that story. He gets on well with quite a few younger characters, so that's a good one to check out, in my opinion. For first-timers, but Twice Upon a Time completely misinterprets the character and does him a complete, massive disservice. It is unjustifiable, and it's a massive shame. And to be honest, quite frankly, after this story is finished, I'm kind of glad I'm going into the Jodie Whittaker era now, because as much as I love Capaldi's Doctor, and as much as I enjoy Series 10, as we're going to see in the following 12 spots, but because of this story, I'm kind of glad I'm jumping into the 13th Doctor's era almost straight away afterwards. Because after this story, I need some Jodie Whittaker. Even though I would have liked Capaldi to stay on, but after this story and Capaldi's gone now, I need some Whittaker in my life. But first, we have 12 more spots of Capaldi and his top 10 stories. So we better carry on with that first. Okay, moving on to number 12 now. The quality of stories steps up a bit more before we get to this one. However, this one is still easily the weakest of the series, minus Twice Upon a Time. And it is Episode 8, The Lie of the Land. For me, The Lie of the Land starts off fantastically. It's a great Inferno meets Turn Left sort of situation of the story with a bit of sound of drums in there. It's a great opener with this fascist dictatorship with the monks in charge. It's so great with Bill and Nardole having to work together to try and find the Doctor, and Bill talking to her, an imaginary version of her mother that you've kind of been talking to across the series anyway, but this is where it kind of helps, and it also ties in with the finale in a way. But unfortunately, after the fake regeneration scene, the story just goes a bit downhill and gets less interesting. And unfortunately, it kind of wraps up the Monks trilogy just weakly. The stuff with Missy in the Vault, whilst fun, just goes on a bit too long, and it doesn't really contribute to the story apart from Missy telling them some way of defeating the monks. But even then, the Doctor tries to avoid it, which makes sense. But it just feels like it was a diversion just so we could have the Missy arc, the second Missy arc of this series begin. And the ending feels a bit like a cop-out. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you get to it, but it just feels a bit underwhelming. It's just a bit of an underwhelming finale, and this to this trilogy of single-part stories that makes up this 3-story trilogy. And it just feels like a weak ending to said trilogy, and just a weak wrap up to the story, which started off really well. Maybe this story needed to be a 2-parter in itself. Maybe we needed Bill and Nardole living in the fascist world, and this could have been a Doctor Light episode where we've only got him a few times on the screens, and then part 2, the cliffhanger is him saying he joins the monks and Bill shooting him, and then part 2 is when he reveals he isn't really in league, and they go to Missy, and then they try and do this great final battle or something. I don't know, but something needed to be fixed for this story, and I think this could be said the same for the Monk trilogy as a whole, but more on that in a bit. But unfortunately, this episode just came across as a bit of a weak finale to this trilogy, which is why this story comes number 12 on this list. And when taking up the Christmas specials, this is the weakest episode of the series. And when putting the Christmas specials in, it's the second weakest. And we're not done with the Monk trilogy stories being this low on the list, as number 11 is Extremis. To be honest, I did enjoy this one, although the ending may have been a bit of a cop-out, and maybe it would have been better if it wasn't virtual world. The monks just had these portals to different places. Then again, I guess CERN would have blown themselves up. But it's still an enjoyable story. It's got some really clever bits. The Doctor being blind for the majority of the episode is pretty cool, and I like that Stephen Moffat took Jamie Matheson's idea about that for another 2 episodes. Jamie Matheson's idea from Oxygen, which we'll get to later on this list. And yeah, I do think this is a good episode, and it's does some good stuff. And to be honest, the virtual world is handled well, but it does feel like a bit of a letdown. But to be honest, it's not anywhere near as much of a letdown as the Lie of the Land's ending, and it's still a pretty good episode. Although I don't know why the Veritas was necessary to the monks' plan. It just felt like it was just there to introduce the monks. And again, if we had more episodes of this saga, maybe if it wasn't just a trilogy, maybe it was a quadrology or quintology, maybe if it was more episodes, then perhaps we could have learned more about these monks. But yeah, Extremis, it's a good episode. It's just maybe the ending's a bit of a letdown. And whilst it's a good episode, it's not the best start to this trilogy, and I think we needed to know a bit more about the monks before we got to Pyramid. And as Lie the Land showed, this trilogy didn't seem to be the best structured trilogy. Honestly, I think the last 3 stories of Series 9 were a bit more structured trilogy, and Hellbent worse than any of these episodes. So yeah, but I think at least those 3 episodes, Face the Raven, Heaven Sent, Hellbent, they at least had a 3-story structure that works to each of those episodes. Even though Hellbent was a terrible story, but the structure still worked for building up to that, as much of a letdown as it was. But here, it doesn't quite work the same way. Now, I do like Pyramid, and I'll get to that later on the list. But Extremis it's good, but could have been better. Maybe if it wasn't in the virtual world, this episode might have secured that 8 out of 10 score I was thinking it would be. But ultimately, it ended up being 7. again, because that's the exact same thing that happened in the original time I watched it. I thought 8 out of 10, then changed my mind, 7. Was that Light of the Land, actually? That might have been Light of the Land. Moving on to number 10, and the next 5 stories on this list are 8 out of 10, so the top 5 are made up of 9 and 10s. Okay, so starting off with number 10, the opening episode of this series, the pilot. I really enjoyed this story. It's a simple, easy back reintroduction to the series with an established Doctor and even an established companion with Nardole, but introducing another companion, a new companion, Bill Potts, and it's a nice start to her story and to the series. It's nice, easy, not too complicated, quite a simple story. Maybe it does have some of the same stuff that Series 8 and 9 had, or Series 5, 6, and 7, but it's trying to be a bit more new, which is odd considering that Series 11 is going to be even more new when we get to it. But it's trying to take what we know before and do something a bit different this time. And I enjoyed that. It's something a bit different. And I like Bill. I thought she was a great character in her first episode, and she continues to be a brilliant character throughout the rest of the series. Out of the Stephen Moffat opening stories, I prefer it to Series 7, 8, and 9's. I think I would probably take it over Series 6. This is my second favourite after, of course, Series 5, which is the 11th hour. Although if I was doing individual episodes, Impossible Astronaut would go above this on its own, but overall, so I think I would take this over Impossible Astronaut Day of the Moon. But yeah, this is a fun, enjoyable, easy start to the series that doesn't require too much complicated stuff going on. It's quite simple. Maybe the running around all over the place is a bit is either a bit silly or is a bit unnecessary. But unlike Twice Upon a Time, there's actually a proper plot to this story, so I can forgive it here. It's fine. The only reason it's 10th on this list is because there's 9 stories better, in my opinion, including the Christmas special that preceded it, and one other story from the Monk trilogy. So there's 9 other stories, 10 other episodes that I think are better than this one, including what's going to be one of my more left field, surprising choices. Number 9. Now, if you saw the Revisitation review recently, then this may not be so much of a surprise, but to those who didn't and you're not too much of a fan of this episode, then this might be a bit of a surprise. Number 9 is The Eaters of Light. So The Eaters of Light, and I was actually a bit surprised that I put this one 11th, or right at the time 12th out of 14, because it was individual episodes, but story-wise 11th out of 13 on my original ranking, even though I gave it 8 out of 10, but it was now in a spot where it would be a 7, unless it was just Light of the Land I did change the score for. But yeah, I was a bit surprised that Eaters of Light came lower than Extremis on my original ranking. But this time round, I really enjoyed Eaters of Light. I was kind of expecting to go into it not really liking it, as most fans don't really enjoy it. Same for Light of the Land, but both of them I actually did like. But Light of the Land I've got quite a few issues with. The only one I've actually gone in expecting to dislike and actually do dislike, maybe even more, is Twice Upon a Time for this series. Other ones I've gone in expecting to like it or to see what they're like. But Eaters of Light, I thought was a good episode. I mean, there could have been a few more improvements here and there. See my review for more details. But honestly, I enjoyed it. I had a bit more appreciation for the story, and I liked the way it was going in places. But I think there could have been a few more improvements, like the monster is very CGI, and honestly, I think those cheetah people from Survival, that was the other Ronan Munro, the writer of this story, also wrote, actually do look better than these creatures do. But I do think this is a pretty good story, and it's one that I think gets overlooked due to the fact it's coming not long after the Monk trilogy, and it's right before the series finale. Quite a few of the penultimate stories of the series get quite overlooked because of the grand finales or because the regeneration story is coming up. And this one is definitely one of the more overlooked penultimate stories of a series. It's not one of the greatest, but it's decent. Moving on to number 8, this is a episode that was a step up from the episode that came before, and as I mentioned earlier in the series reviews, each episode from the pilot to Oxygen just got better and better as the series went along, and this was a pretty great follow-up to the pilot, even though again it had a few issues that could have been resolved and made it even better. Number 8 is Smile. Now, yeah, Smile, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a great fun episode. Frank Cottrell Boyce more than makes up for not writing a interesting story within the Forest of Night, though I didn't really hate that one, but it wasn't very interesting and not quite that fun. I gave it a meh score, but Smile is it's really good, has some really great things going for it. Again, it's only really the ending, the climax, and this seems to be the thing some of the series 10 episodes isn't very good at sorting out is the climax. The climax of this episode, it's between this and Live the Land, which one's the weakest. It's just rushed. That's what it feels like. It's rushed. Also, this is the story the Doctor uses the sonic screwdriver the most in this series, so it's actually quite fun. Is it this episode? No, it's on Oxygen. In Oxygen, where it gets crushed by one of the suits. But yeah, I think Smile, he overuses the sonic screwdriver, and this is already an issue that's already been a thing for the 11th and 12th Doctors, maybe also for 10, and it's going to be a thing that will carry on with 13 as well. But in this series, this is the episode where it's overdone, but thankfully it's toned down a bit, and even having that joke in Oxygen, which seems to be a thing with Jamie Matheson because of the sonic sunglasses snapping in Girl Who Waited. But yeah, Oxygen, I thought it was a fun story, and also it was a good one to show Bill an alien planet and these alien robots, but it was that climax that let it down from being an even better story. Not only could this have been a 9 out of 10, but it could even potentially have been a 10 out of 10, but the climax let it down. Maybe it was a little bit slow as well in places, but I had a good time with it, so I wasn't too worried about the pacing. In fact, I actually think it was a bit of a quick pacing. I just think the lack of supporting characters for the first 2/3 minus the pre-title scene, maybe that's what it is, but honestly the pacing is actually pretty good in this episode. Actually, when we do get the supporting characters, they're not that great, to be honest, so honestly I wouldn't have minded it just being the Doctor and Bill on their own. I would have been fine with that. Heaven Sent proved that you can just have one or two main characters in a story and it just wouldn't have much of an issue, and unlike Twice Upon a Time, there actually is something going on in this episode. Moving on to number 7, the best episode of the Monk trilogy, in my opinion, The Pyramid at the End of the World. This is the story that's probably dropped in opinion the most. In the original ranking, this was third. Fourth when it was individual episodes, but story-wise, it would have been third. And now it's dropped down to 7th. As I mentioned in the review, it's around the middle, but yeah, I mean, it's at the middle exactly. Which is a shame. This is a good episode, but again, we kind of just building up the monks again. We already did quite a lot of this in Extremis, and this only gives one episode to kind of wrap up what's done at the end. So again, maybe this should have been a quadology, or scrap Extremis, and the Doctor just knows about the monks. He's heard about them, etc., and he's just worried about them. So this could have been more like part 1 rather, and then Live the Land could have been a 2-parter, or make it a quadology or quintology or whatever. But yeah, it's still a good episode with its building up. The monks saying, "Oh, we'll protect you if you give us consent to take over your planet." And there's this biological threat that's happening, and the Doctor and company have to try and find and stop it without having to consent to the monks. And ultimately, the monks only get to the planet because the Doctor is blind and Bill needs to save him. And I thought that was actually pretty good on a character basis. Now, I can understand people not enjoying this one. It might be a bit slow for them. Not an awful lot may happen, and I can understand that. But personally, I thought it was a pretty good episode, pretty interesting. I liked having everybody from the opposing wars come together to actually team up to try and come up with a plan to go against the monks. We need to have more of that in real life as well as in media. And yeah, I think it carries on Peter Harness and Stephen Moffat's joint anti-war message that we got in the Zygon 2-parter. Nevertheless, it does feel like it's unnecessary the middle, when either it should have been the start or there should have been more following it, at the very least. But as it is, as a second of 3 stories, it does feel like there should have been more before and there should be more afterwards. Or this should be the start and then there'd be more afterwards. But on its own, it's a great episode, though I can understand if you're not so keen on it. Moving up to number 6, my second favourite of the Ice Warriors television stories, and easily the better of the 2 of the new series ones, Mark Gatiss' final script, Empress of Mars. his final television script for Doctor Who, at the very least for now. But yeah, Empress of Mars, I think, is a very good episode. I mean, I am kind of getting a bit tired of Doctor caught in the middle of two opposing fighting forces, and the same happens in East of Light, except that one does kind of give that a bit of a new twist of it being children and teenagers, and then they realise, oh shit, we're kind of acting like children and teenagers. We've got to get to work together. Whilst Empress of Mars is just the stereotypical two forces against each other. Doctor needs to get them to work together to avoid bloodshed. It's basically what we got with the Silurians quite often in the show, and I'm kind of getting a bit tired of that at the moment, unless it gets turned on its head. Like, say, maybe at the very end they do team up together. With Empress of Mars, they kind of, looks like we're on the verge of it, but don't quite get there yet until one of the humans actually proves himself worthy of having the two species team up. Now, that could be a good idea, but because we did get so much of that anti-each-otherness, it did drag my enjoyment a little bit. That being said, I do think the story is still a pretty good one. The characters are quite fun, and the interactions, whilst it is a bit maybe overdone by this point, it's still pretty handled well, and I can definitely tell that Mark Gatiss, from this episode on Cold War, he loves to write the Ice Warriors, just as much as Russell T Davies loved and got the Daleks. And I think he just does a really great job, and I'm glad he got to write the story he wanted, as it could have been it could still be his last Doctor Who television story. Until he comes back, it currently is. So, yeah, I'm glad he got to write the story he always wanted to tell, the Ice Warrior Mars story with Victorian humans. Okay, so now we're moving into top 5 territory, and now we've got some 9 out of 10s, starting with the 2016 Christmas special, and probably my most controversial pick, The Return of Dr. Mysterio. I say controversial, there might be quite a few fans of this one, but it's also not a highly popular story. And it's a Christmas special written by Stephen Moffat, and maybe it didn't get a huge, and maybe it's not very huge in opinion based on in the fan base. Not everybody will like this one, so I think this one might be my most controversial pick. But Return of Doctor Mysterio, I think it's a great story. I think it's the best Christmas special since probably Voyage of the Damned. This one is certainly a really great one for me. I just really enjoyed it. Had a great time, some great characters. My only kind of issue I guess I have with it is the ending. I mean, I'm fine with the climax itself, but the villains escape without consequence. They're not defeated, they're just stopped. And I thought maybe that will be resolved in the third story with these guys, because they've also popped up in Husbands of the Song, the story before this one, the 2015 Christmas special that was in the last ranking. But they never come back again. They haven't turned up in the 13th Doctor's era. They don't turn up in this series. I thought maybe that was going to be the next Christmas special or an episode of Series 10. These Harmony Soul creatures, they were going to come back. Instead of doing the Monk trilogy, you could have done this story alongside 2 other stories that we could have told, but no. Yeah, they just didn't come back. And again, instead of Twice Upon a Time, we could have had a story about these guys. Heck, maybe these guys are the ones responsible for the taking people out of time. They've got this technology, etc. You could have done something fun with that. But no, this is the last appearance we have of them so far, at least on television. Maybe Big Finish will do something with them in the future, or the comics or the books or something. But until then, this is it, and I'm disappointed that we don't see more of them. But the rest of the story is still pretty engaging, pretty fun. It's quite interesting that we've got one of the longer, or the longest pre-titles scene in the show, near about 9 or so minutes. It's a long one, but I think that helps set up the character of Grant and his connection with the Doctor, and it's a pretty fun opening anyway. And then the rest of the story, as mentioned, it's quite a fun one. But there are a few issues with it, such as I think we should have had a third story with the Harmony Soul aliens if they're going to escape. Just be stopped, but still escape. I think we should have had another story to see where that went, or at least to see them again. But as it is, they're just gone, which is a massive shame. Right, moving on to number 4. This one may be a less controversial pick, but maybe questionable this high. Number 4 is Thin Ice. Once again, I find this to be an enjoyable story. There's some good stuff going on. The Doctor and Bill get some great character interactions, and the kid characters, they're fun to watch. I mean, they're not the greatest characters. They're not the worst kid characters either. But, they're fun for this story. The villain does suck a bit. He's probably the weakest villain of this series. I don't count the Twice Upon a Time ones as villains. And also, I don't think I would count Heather as a villain. Then again, she would have been a better villain than this guy anyway. If she was, maybe not by much, but a bit. So, yeah, and even though the Eaters of Light creatures, I wasn't so keen on them, they at least do some horrible stuff to people, either on screen, but more so off screen. But this guy, what's his face? I can't even remember the character's name. Whatever. He's just boring. He's bland. He's a human villain, which is fine, but he's just boring. He doesn't really do anything. And that's a big shame. Give him a bit more backstory to, this is the family business and I'm a prick, also a bit of a racist. I'm just doing this for my own personal gain. I mean, yeah, he kind of helps out the Empire, but yeah, that's basically it for his motive. He's boring. I don't mind not knowing much about the fish creature, because that could be left as a mystery. That could be fine, and you don't have to have everything explained. You could do your own theorizes and interesting ideas. Of course, there are some things that should get explained. But with some things, they can be left as a mystery and to be left up to theorizing and the imagination, such as the Midnight Entity. So, yeah, I don't mind not knowing that much about the fish creature. Maybe we should have been able to care for it a bit more, but maybe that might have helped the villain as well. That might have made us care a bit more about the villain. But regardless, this was still a fun episode. Moving on to number 3. Now, this is where we get to 10 out of 10 territory, and we've got 2 extra 10 out of 10 stories to when I originally did my ranking, so Oxygen fans will be glad to know. But before we get to that episode, you'll be even more glad to know, we've got another story. Now, this one was probably my most happy surprise. I mean, I didn't expect this one to come this high on my ranking this time round, and it's gone up 3 places on my ranking. Is this the one that's gone up the most? This and Empress of Mars together, but Pyramids has gone down the most. Yes, number 3 is Knock Knock. The only episode written by a new incoming writer, Rona Munro wrote for the classic series, and then everyone else has written for at least one of the previous 9 revived series, or expanded media. But Mike Barlett does a fantastic job with writing Knock Knock. It's a scary, spooky, creepy adventure for the first half, and then a dramatic, character-driven second half with these alien woodlice creatures. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we get a name. The Doctor gives them a nickname, but we don't get a proper name. But they're still pretty interesting creatures. We don't know that much about them, and it might be interesting to explore what they're like in future stories. But for this episode, what we get with them is pretty interesting. I like Bill's friends. They're pretty good supporting characters, although Pavel sadly doesn't get much to do. Then again, he is victim number 1, so that makes sense. And the cast do pretty good jobs with their characters. And David Suchet is probably my favourite guest actor in this series. And it's a great episode. They just do some really great, clever sci-fi horror stuff and character drama stuff in the story. It's very clever and pretty creepy as well. And just a very well done episode. And surprisingly, it was really great and really enjoyed. And also does some stuff for Bill's character, and we get some contemporary Earth threats that doesn't revolve in a grand scale invasion like the monks. But it's not just relegated to a personal battle like in the Pirates. It's something that could happen down your local streets any day with anyone. So I think that works really well for this story, and it was a great episode. Definitely a good one to put on at Halloween. Moving on to number 2, another good one to put on at Halloween, but this one's more of a sci-fi horror rather than a contemporary Earth horror. And this is, of course, written by the amazing Jamie Matheson, Oxygen. Yep, Oxygen is a brilliant, tense, spooky, creepy, scary sci-fi story with some more character growth for the Doctor Bill, and also Nardole, as this is the story where it starts to pick up Nardole a bit more. He had a bit of that in Mysterio, the pilot, and a bit of Smile and Thin Ice, maybe a tad in Knock Knock. But this is where it really picks up. This is where it picks up and runs for Nardal throughout the rest of the series. He's such a great character throughout. And I love how his character's been progressing since Husbands with a Song, where it was comic relief, very silly. You could have done without him. And once we knew he was going to be a companion for me, we were thinking, oh no. But then he started to get a bit better over the course of Mysterio and the first couple of episodes of this series. And then he ultimately ended up being a fantastic character throughout the rest of this series. And he was able to go more serious and mature. And ultimately ended up having a pretty good conclusion to that arc by taking over from the Doctor, looking after the children and the adults on the spaceship in the Doctor Falls, and he ended up having a great conclusion to his arc in the finale. So, yeah, I thought the development of Nardal was great, and having him included was really great. The supporting cast I don't think were amazing, but they were good for this episode. But the suits were really creepy creatures, and the zombie creatures. Wow, that was some creepy stuff, and they were really great monsters. And the whole anti-capitalism in space message was handled pretty well, because capitalism isn't perfect, guys. I mean, it's not all bad, but it's not all good either. And yeah, there's always that possibility that perhaps if human life gets expensive, it will be disposed of. And I think this is a great message that the story is going forward, just the warnings of that potentially happening, especially if we do go into space and it does become a thing in the future. But yeah, it's still a really great, intense, creepy horror story. Is this my favourite Jamie Mathieson Doctor Who story? No, but I think all three of his are three of the best episodes of the Capaldi era, as you will see in the next ranking. And spoiler alert, the one that doesn't make it to the top 10 stories ranking might actually come 11th, as it will be the honourable mention. So he writes 4 of the best 11 stories of the era. So yeah, more on that next time. But yeah, Oxygen, fantastic. But what could be better than the Jamie Mathieson horror masterpiece that is Oxygen? Well, how about the second greatest series finale of the new series, and maybe even the second greatest finale of the show, full stop? Number 1 is Wild Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls. Whatever Stephen Moffat had to get out of his system with finales with series 8 and 9, he got out of it, and he managed to write one of the best finales ever, and easily the best episode of this series, and it's fighting with Heaven Sent for being the best story of the 12 Doctors era. You'll find out which one is the winner next time. But this story is amazing. The first episode is still my favourite, which is stayed the same from 2017. Now, once you got all the Missy being the Doctor kind of being a bit of a parody, dabbing and the winking and all that stuff. Maybe that was Michelle Gomez improvising on set as well. But once you get all of that stuff out of the way, and once Bill gets shot, that's when the story gets serious. That's when it gets fantastic, and that's when it gets dark. And it just keeps getting darker and darker until the end of the episode, and it just keeps getting better and better, and it's just so good. Part 2, The Doctor Falls, is my second favourite episode of this series in going individually, so together they make the best story. And it's a great action-packed drama story where they have to try and defend just this small group of people from an incoming Cyberman attack. It's such a great ending and such an emotional conclusion to the 12th Doctor's era, bar one episode that will follow afterwards, because it's technically the penultimate episode and this is the penultimate story. If this story had been the 12th Doctor's final story as initially planned, this one would definitely be top 3. It would be fighting out with Casey Androzani for number 2, but Bad Wolf Passing Away would still be number 1. However, we got Twice Upon a Time as his final story, and ultimately this one is not one of the top regeneration stories. It's one of the top pre-regeneration stories, like Dave the Doctor, The Waters of Mars. But unfortunately, the 12th Doctor got the weakest regeneration story. Well, after Time Nirani, but if you take that one out and replace it with The Brink of Death, then yes, it is. So yeah, that's a shame. But this was a fantastic finale and 2 amazing episodes, and a great way to wrap up the series, even if there was one more episode left for this Doctor, and technically for the series because it's the special. But as the finale, it was amazing. So, that's it from my Doctor Who Series 10 2021 Revisitation ranking. Before we end, let's quickly go through the list again. Number 13 is Twice Upon a Time. Number 12, The Lie of the Land. Number 11, Extremis. Number 10, The Pilot. Number 9, Deities of Light. Number 8, Smile. Number 7, The Pyramids at the End of the World. Number 6, Empress of Mars. Number 5, The Return of Dr. Mysterio. Number 4, Thin Ice. Number 3, Knock Knock. Number 2, Oxygen. And number 1, World Enough in Time. And The Doctor Falls. And also at the end, I'll do a text comparison of where these stories came, what was their position last time, and what their position is now, and what's changed and what stayed the same. A couple have stayed the same, a couple have gone up, a couple have gone down. But yeah, final thoughts on this series before we wrap up this ranking. Series 10 is my favourite of the Capaldi series by a long shot, even though I did kind of enjoy 9 a bit more on the rewatch, but it's still one of the weaker ones. 8 went down a bit in opinion, but it's still alright. But 10 is a masterpiece, well, apart from maybe the some episodes, one of which isn't even in the complete box set. So you have to get that one individually. Or maybe if they re-released a steelbook, then they might include it. But yeah, but this is a fantastic series. It's also my second favourite Stephen Moffat produced series after Series 5. And with the first 4 new series Doctors, the first or last series seem to be the best of them. We'll see how it goes for the 13th Doctor. Hopefully Series 13 will be her best, if it's her last. And if it's not her last, well, hopefully it'll be her best until we get to the last one, which will then be better. Or the next series just be better anyway. But yeah, Series 10 is a great series. I really enjoyed it. I know it's not hugely popular. It's liked, but it's not hugely popular because it's Capaldi and Moffat. But it's probably more liked than most of the other Moffat series is because it's trying to be better. And for the most parts, I think it succeeds. I think the only places it's a letdown, besides Twice Upon a Time, is probably Lie of the Land's conclusion. I think it could have been a better conclusion to the Monk Trilogy. Besides that, the only real bad point about this series is Twice Upon a Time. And like I said, that and unless they reissued the Steelbook with Twice Upon a Time included, or re-released the complete series with Twice Upon a Time included, you have to get that one in individually anyway, so you can count it as part of the series, but in terms of home media releases, you can get that one separately if you so wish. Because you have to, unless they re-release the series with it included. But yeah, that being said, it is a massive disappointing final story for the 12th Doctor, which is kind of why I'm a bit excited to go into the 13th Doctor's era now, because of that story on its own. The rest of the series, loving Capaldi, loving Pearl Mackie as Bill, loving Nardole, played by Matt Lucas, really enjoying Michelle Gomez as Missy, and John Sim was at his best as the Master in the finale, and a couple of other great characters as well, including the brilliant David Suchet. As I mentioned, he was my favourite guest actor of this series. But Twice Upon a Time, I'm glad I'm moving into the Whittaker era after that. Even if I would have preferred Capaldi to stay on, I'm just glad that I'm moving on from that final story. Heck, I don't even care which Doctor it is. I'm just glad to get away from Twice Upon a Time and move into a new era. But Series 10 was still a great final series for Moffat and for Capaldi. So, that's it from my Doctor Who Series 10 ranking. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, before we finish up, I forgot to mention that this series, Series 10, is also season 36 overall. So, yeah, 36 seasons done. Woo! Ha! On the home stretch with the last 2 seasons coming up soon. But we've got one more 12th Doctor video to do before we move on to the 13th Doctor's era. And that is, of course, the top 10 12th Doctor stories / episodes. So I'll be ranking my top 10 12th Doctor stories, and that should be coming out tomorrow, hopefully. And then, after a few days' break, we will then jump into the Series 11 reviews. Again, as I said, I'm actually looking forward to jumping into the Whittaker era, because I just want to get away from Twice Upon a Time. But actually, it'll be quite interesting to see what Series 11 is like after 3.5 years. 3.5 years? 2.5 years. From autumn, winter 2018-19 to spring 2021. It'll be interesting to see what my opinions are of the episodes after 2.5 years or so since broadcast. But that's the next series' reviews. But first, the top 10 12th Doctor stories. I'll see you guys then. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.